Victoria was about to marry me when I discovered her diary from when she was 16. She wrote, "Being chased by this idiot is so disgusting. He wouldn't actually think that accepting his gifts means I like him, would he? So gross." I was shocked. The childhood sweetheart romance I believed in was a complete fabrication. A cool breeze touched the summer night. Victoria hadn't spoken a word since entering the house. I took off my jacket and sat down. Mrs. Wilson offered me tea, motioning for me to relax. She turned to Victoria and said, "You and Sebastian have been together for 7 years. If you don't want to marry him, break up with him now. The house is bought, the furniture is all set. You haven't made a decision. Do you even want to get married? Sebastian isn't pressuring you because he's a good guy, not because you can be capricious." Mrs. Wilson's cheeks flushed with anger. She paused, then continued, "Why aren't you saying anything? Say something." I quickly reassured her, "It's okay, Auntie. No rush." She sighed, turning her head. "How can there be no rush? This girl is stringing you along and I can't stand it anymore. I just don't understand what she wants." Victoria nervously picked at her nails, her face cold. Only after her mother finished did she lift her head, a look of resentment on her face. "Fine. I'll marry him. Do whatever you want." She stood up, her heels clicking angrily as she stormed upstairs without a glance in my direction. My heart sank. I murmured a few words of comfort to Mrs. Wilson and rushed after her. The sound of running water filled the bathroom. Victoria was showering. I sat on the bed, staring blankly at the floor. Trying to keep my voice calm, I asked, "Don't you want to get married?" The water was too loud, she couldn't hear me. She turned off the shower and opened the door, wrapped only in a bathrobe. Her hair was soaking wet, her body still damp. Water droplets traced a path from her bright eyes down to her collarbone. I was momentarily speechless, unsure what to say. "Close your eyes," she coldly hummed, grabbing a change of clothes from a chair. Nodded, not looking at her until she handed me the hairdryer, saying, "You can open your eyes now." She was already dressed, sitting next to me. "What do you want to say?" I sighed, drying her hair. "Don't. You want to get married?" She shook her head. "No, I don't. Don't think that." But I knew Victoria was lying. She didn't want to marry me at all. I wanted to suggest postponing the wedding, or say I wasn't in a hurry, but the words caught in my throat. Only the hum of the hairdryer filled the room. After a while, I touched her dry hair, then stood up. "I'm going to bed." She grabbed my hand, pouting. "You're going to sleep in a separate room?" she asked. "Are you upset?" I forced a smile. "Not at all." She bit her lip. "I'll do whatever you say. I'm going to marry you. What more do you want?" "What else do you want me to do?" Victoria's irritation grew, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "Pushing me like this only makes me feel sick." In 7 years, she'd never spoken to me like that. Perhaps overwhelmed by the pressure to get married, she'd lost control for the first time in front of me. For a moment, I felt like a fool. She didn't look at me again before leaving, the faint scent of her bath products the only reminder of what had happened. After that, neither Victoria nor I mentioned that night, nor postponing the wedding. She became increasingly distant, even indifferent about choosing her wedding dress. She didn't even attend Mrs. Wilson's birthday party. Everyone made light of it, but we both knew she was angry at her mother. I ignored the unease in my heart, pretending everything was fine, forcing a smile until one day a few weeks later, I woke to find her staring at her phone. "Why aren't you sleeping?" I asked, trying to sit up. She quickly closed her phone. Closing her eyes, she mumbled, "Going to sleep now." But in that instant, I saw a picture on her screen and the tears in the corners of her eyes. It was a photo of 17-year-old Victoria and 17-year-old Ethan. I turned away, feeling like I'd fallen into an ice-cold abyss. I remembered the scornful look on her best friend's face years ago. "Even if you're together now, what does it matter? You're Far inferior to Ethan, you fat slob. What had I been thinking back then? I thought if I persevered long enough I could melt Victoria's icy heart. But now the naked truth was before me, and my heart felt like it was being stabbed. She'd never forgotten Ethan. The facade of strength she'd maintained crumbled. Suddenly, I didn't want to get married anymore. I wanted to break up with Victoria. After making the decision, I considered when to tell them. From high school until now, Mrs. Wilson had always been kind to me. I could see she truly cared for me and treated me like a son. That's why I was struggling to find a way to break the news with the least amount of hurt. Victoria's wedding dress fitting was postponed due to my supposed work emergency. After college, I joined a media company, handling the marketing and planning for fitness celebrities. Victoria wasn't thrilled with my job, as it required long hours and sometimes early morning meetings at 2 a.m. When I claimed to be busy, she didn't suspect a thing, even seemed relieved. Except for Mrs. Wilson, who thought Victoria was being stubborn and unreasonable, so she scolded her. When I got home, she had just hung up the phone, her eyes red. She grabbed her purse and said, "Sebastian, wait for me. Auntie is going to find her. What's more important than her trying on a wedding dress and getting married? She's really foolish." From Mrs. Wilson's words, I understood. Ethan had returned. That explained her absent-mindedness, her relief at my lack of availability for the dress fitting, everything. When someone is utterly speechless, they laugh. Mrs. Wilson quickly tried to soothe things. "Victoria's just throwing a tantrum these days. It'll pass. Auntie," I interrupted, "let us handle this ourselves. I'll take care of it." I went upstairs, stood there for a while, reached for my phone, dropped it. Picking it up, I leaned against the bed and called her. After a few rings, I heard a noisy background. "What is it?" she asked. "Where are you?" I asked. There was a pause, then a cold snort. "What do you mean by that? Are you doubting me?" She moved to a quieter spot. "Sebastian, must you humiliate me? My mom's scolding wasn't enough. Now you want to join in? I said I'd marry you. Isn't that enough?" "Where are you?" I repeated, my fingers digging into my flesh, barely suppressing a burst of anger. 13 Big Orange Street, come if you want." She paused, then added, "And bring the paper bag from my nightstand." The call ended. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, controlling my rage. I never snooped through Victoria's things. I believed in privacy in a marriage. I opened the nightstand drawer. The paper bag was immediately visible. As I reached for it, my gaze fell upon a diary. Sometimes you just know, like being called on in class. I knew I shouldn't open it, but my eyes were drawn to it. The moment I opened it, my breath hitched. It read August 29th, 2015. "A new person came to live with us. Mom and Dad say he's an athlete. He always smells of sweat. It's annoying." I remember that scorching day. I arrived at the Wilsons, laden with bags. My parents and Mrs. Wilson were close friends. That year, I joined the state team, and for convenience, they arranged my transfer to their school. Victoria was the first to greet me at the door, in a pristine white dress. Her features were delicate and gentle. She smiled, ushered me in, and asked, "I'm Victoria. What's your name?" "Sebastian," she nodded, offering a bag of sweets. "These are homemade treats from me and my mom. If you need anything, just ask. Mom and I will help." She was so sweet and kind. Arriving there, I was rather cheeky, watching her smile, feeling like a soft seed had been planted in my heart. I never imagined how she felt about me back then. Another entry read, November 5th, 2015. "I think he looks at me strangely." Does he? Like me? He even gave me a birthday gift. A hand-carved wooden cat. Tiffany asked for it, so I gave it to her. I got goosebumps. January 3rd, 2016. I hate their jokes about us. March 7th, 2016. He actually confessed. So cringe. Do I look like a romance novel protagonist? How much longer until he moves out? My throat felt constricted. My hands trembled as I turned the pages. When I first came to North City, I had few friends. Mostly I kept to myself, except for the other athletes. Victoria, however, often sought me out at school. She introduced me as her brother, confided in me, and bandaged my wounds. Falling for Victoria was perfectly natural. Even knowing she didn't love me, even planning to leave her, I never regretted my youthful infatuation. Back then, I didn't have much money. My carving skills were poor, so I learned to carve wood. That cat took weeks, several ruined pieces, and many cuts on my fingers. When I gave it to her at the party, everyone looked. I felt awkward, about to take it back. Victoria accepted the gift, placing it back in the box. "Thank you," she said. "I like it." I believed her. Even when her friend Tiffany mouthed insults, "fatty," I didn't react. I never cared what others thought. My dad always said, "Save your feelings for those who matter most." I liked Victoria, therefore. I liked the gift. 17-year-old me couldn't have imagined she'd hand it off to Tiffany, who tossed it in a trash can outside. I never understood Tiffany's malice until later. It was simply because I was a loner, refused to join her clique, and she thought I was putting on an act. But then, I didn't know. I thought Victoria was different. When I confessed, stammering, unable to form a complete sentence, she smiled brightly. "Thank you for your feelings," she said, "but I'm not interested in dating right now." What was she thinking? I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to read her diary. April 9th, 2016. He seems to misunderstand. He doesn't really think I'll like him just because I accepted his gift. He's so ugly it makes me nauseous to even look at him. I'm going to get a boyfriend so this fatty will give up. I chuckled, realizing how absurd, cheap, and insignificant my feelings were. She could have simply told me, and I would have stayed away. I scrimped and saved my allowance, buying her expensive jewelry she'd subtly hinted at wanting, only to find this in her diary. The last entry was May 13th. That night, Victoria was accosted by thugs. I defended her, shielding her with my body. I was beaten, my hand injured so badly I could no longer weightlift. After that, Victoria and Ethan broke up. He soon left for college overseas, ending their relationship. In college, I lost weight and changed my image. The former chubby disappeared. My relationship with Victoria began to shift. Perhaps out of gratitude, perhaps the lighting that night was too romantic, she poked my arm, looking up at me. "Do you still like me?" she asked. I was stunned. The next second, she tiptoed, wrapped her arms around my neck, and kissed me. The first day we were official, Victoria told her mother, Mrs. Wilson. "Mom, we're together," she said, seeming relieved, as if a weight had been lifted. Looking back, I realized my perceived sincerity was nothing more than her misguided attempt at repayment. My thoughts returned to the present. I arrived at the bar and saw Victoria with Tiffany and several men, drinking and singing. She refused a man's request for a song. Tiffany, as always, was stirring the pot. "Victoria, loosen up. Ethan's back. Break up with Sebastian. You can't seriously love him, can you?" I still remember the first time I met him. Dark, fat, clumsy, giving you an ugly wooden carving as a gift. It made me want to vomit. Victoria replied, "Are you annoying on purpose?" She put down the microphone, about to speak when the door opened. Everyone froze. Victoria looked flustered, but seeing me, she regained her composure. I handed her a bag. "What you wanted?" "Thank you." She hesitated, about to explain, when I produced her diary. "Amusing?" I asked. Losing control, I yelled, "Amusing, Victoria?" I slammed the diary on the floor. She didn't move, her eyes filled with panic. She tried to grab my arm, but I dodged her. Tiffany pushed me. "Are you crazy?" I slapped Tiffany. "What are you?" I'm talking to her. "I've tolerated you for years, you gossiping hag. Fatty, chubby, loser, I'm sick of hearing it. I'm a weightlifter. I gained weight for my career. What's shameful about that? My parents don't even comment on my weight or looks. Who are you to judge me?" "You," who spends all day posting on social media, pretending to be some socialite. You're just Victoria's pathetic follower. And what disgusts me most is that you've been clinging to her like a leech for years. People would think I robbed your family grave." My eyes were bloodshot. Tiffany stunned, just bit her lip. Victoria grabbed my arm. "Sebastian, calm down." I shoved her away. My mother had remained remarkably calm. I picked up the diary from the floor, pulled her over, and opened it. Victoria's face grew paler with each line she read. She murmured, "Let me explain." "Explain what?" I scoffed. "Break up with me," I said, a cruel smile playing on my lips. "Just the thought of you makes me sick." I turned and left without looking back. Victoria tried to follow, but I stopped her. "Are you chasing after me to marry me?" I asked. She stopped, watching me walk away, until I completely disappeared from her sight. For days after our confrontation, Victoria avoided me. Everyone in the house sensed something was wrong, but no one dared ask. I told my mother first. She wasn't surprised. She asked if I wanted to come home. "I need to think about it," I replied. "I haven't broken up with Auntie yet." Regardless of what happened with Victoria, Mrs. Wilson had always been genuinely kind to me. I didn't want to upset her. Plus, I couldn't just quit my job on a whim. Starting over would take time. After hanging up, I stared at my reflection for a long time. My job required me to maintain a certain image, and I'd transformed myself. Gazing at my reflection, I saw a ghost of my past self, the one who bent over the golf club, practicing day in and day out. That person seemed a lifetime away, replaced by this image-conscious individual meticulously monitoring his body fat percentage. I had changed, but not in the way I expected. I missed the old me, the one who poured sweat into his future, unconcerned with appearances, focused only on skill. Life's choices often hinge on a single thought. That evening, I cooked a whole table of food. I didn't want to be like Victoria, dragging things out. I knew I had to initiate the breakup, otherwise Mrs. Wilson wouldn't let it go. After dinner, I announced, "I broke up with Victoria." Before she could respond, I added, "I initiated it." Mrs. Wilson's eyes welled up. I served her more rice and gently comforted her. "Auntie, I know you treated me like a son, but feelings can't be forced." I honestly didn't have any feelings for Victoria. "I'm quitting my job. I've already submitted my resignation. Once I finish the handover, I'm going home." "Auntie," I smiled, "if you miss me, you can come visit." Mrs. Wilson remained silent, only crying. After a long while, she choked out, "It's Victoria's fault. She's too willful. I wish I had known. I'm sorry." I comforted her until she finally accepted the reality. Victoria learned I was leaving a fortnight later on my last day of work. I had a flight booked for 10 o'clock the next morning back to my hometown. She knocked on my door, her voice trembling. "Can I talk to you?" Time really does dull the edges. My anger had subsided, replaced by a deeper apathy. I pulled the corners of my mouth upward. "We don't have anything to talk about. Don't worry, it's amicable. I won't say anything to Auntie. She won't pressure you anymore." "That's not what I meant," she replied. I opened the door and Victoria and I met eyes. She looked distraught, clearly sleep-deprived. "What time is your flight tomorrow?" she asked. "Can I go with you?" "Suit yourself," I said, closing the door. The next day, Victoria accompanied me to the airport. I agreed it was the last time, and for Mrs. Wilson's sake, I didn't want to make a scene. As we got out of the car, I picked up my luggage to leave. She instinctively grabbed the handle. I tugged it impatiently, my gaze cold. She flinched, her eyes downcast, and slowly released her grip. "Don't forget to contact me," she said. I scoffed and walked away without looking back. The first thing I did before boarding was block Victoria. No contact was the best outcome for us back home. I slept for 3 days straight. My hometown had a slower pace than the city. After the wedding cancellation, my relatives didn't pry. They simply urged me to go out more. A few weeks later, they started arranging blind dates. My mother, exasperated, managed to dissuade them. Over the years, I'd saved a considerable amount, over $300,000. I put most of it in a fixed deposit and invested a portion. Chen Z, a high school friend, was starting a social media venture. Hearing I was back, he immediately wanted me on board. It was a street friendship program. We'd randomly interview strangers. If they wanted to make friends, they'd write down their characteristics on a piece of paper, and we'd pass it on to the next person. If they were a match, we'd arrange a meeting. I'd been contemplating what to do next, and Chen Zi's idea was perfect. I wired him $50,000 as seed funding. Chen Zi was ecstatic. "We'll be huge," he exclaimed. I felt a mix of apprehension and excitement. A new life lay ahead, and whether it succeeded or failed, I was ready. The excitement of exploring a different path, the thrill of starting a self-media career, it all spurred us into action. We began planning our first video shoot, initially in a college town. We randomly approached a few passers-by, but the response was lukewarm. So, we moved the location to an elementary school. This time, things went more smoothly. Interacting with younger children always felt less stressful. After the shoot, we planned to grab a bite to eat. Suddenly, Chen Zi tapped my shoulder. "Hey, check out that beauty," he whispered, pointing towards a girl in a white dress standing under a shady tree. She was slender, with delicate features, and seemed to have been watching us for a while. She approached, her cheeks flushed. "Excuse me," she asked. "Is this a dating app?" She held out her phone. "Can I get to know you?" The next second, my phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number, a picture of Victoria and Ethan holding hands. The caption read, "They're together." I knew exactly who it was. Rage flared. I replied, "You're asking for another slap." After sending the message, I blocked Tiffany's number. Chen Zi noticed my discomfort. "What's wrong?" he asked softly. "Nothing," I mumbled. "Just encountered an idiot." As I said this, I looked up at the girl in front of me. "I didn't mean you," I clarified. She smiled faintly. "I know," she said, offering her phone again. "My name is Yu Wei." After exchanging contact information, I returned home. My mother's hesitant words revealed that my encounter with Yu Wei wasn't accidental. We were junior high school classmates. I dug out our graduation photo, searching several times before finally identifying the small, slender girl in a corner as the same person. I had no memory of her. "Look," my mother said. "Her name is Yu Wei. Maybe she had a crush on you." Years later, their paths crossed again, a spark ignited. "Mom," I said exasperatedly, "how many romance novels have you read?" I made one mistake with Victoria. I'm not repeating it. I opened Yu Wei's new contact photo and texted, "We were classmates in middle school." She typed and deleted several times before replying, "You won't mind, will you?" "Mind what?" I replied. "Can we hang out more often?" "I don't have many friends here," she added. Over time, Yu Wei became a regular fixture in our lives, even helping us with video production. She was fun, kind, energetic, and could chat effortlessly with anyone, from toddlers to octogenarians. My mother adored her, even trying to force her to have dinner at our house. "You're quite different from our first encounter," I commented one day. She didn't understand at first, then realized I was referring to her transformation from a quiet, innocent girl to a lively, friendly young woman. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a touch of defiance in her eyes. "First impressions matter," she said. I chuckled. "I'm not a block of wood," I replied. I understood her intentions, but I wasn't ready for a new relationship. I told her as much, directly. That day she came to me holding her orange cat, looking heartbroken. "Look," she said, "nobody wanted to adopt this orange cat before. People think they eat too much and get fat easily. He's so lonely." I nodded sympathetically. So I adopted him and even gave him a small snack. A simple act of kindness can make a cat so happy, isn't that a good deed? I was speechless. She continued, I've been alone here for years, only petting my cat all day. Isn't that pitiful? Shouldn't good people be rewarded? So, I asked. So, she said, could you be my first friend? Consider it an act of charity. Silence descended. Moonlight bathed her in its pale glow. She looked nervous, as if every second of my hesitation was a death sentence. I took the cat, texted her, Hi, new friend. Yue smiled. 2 months later, I received a message from Victoria. She got a new phone and kept trying to reach me. Once I accidentally answered, she didn't speak. My patience snapped. Victoria, I said, stop bothering me. Her voice was low. Mom misses you. When are you coming home? The mention of Mrs. Wilson softened me. She occasionally sent me money, probably worried about my unemployment. When I didn't accept, she started sending me healthy recipes. When I first lived with the Wilsons, she did the same, constantly cooking for me. She stayed up all night caring for me when I was sick. I couldn't bring myself to be completely cruel to her. My dislike for Victoria softened as well. Sensing my wavering, she pressed on. Can I come see you? You and Ethan got back together, didn't you? I interrupted. There was a moment of silence. I scoffed. You do this with every boyfriend. Taking a deep breath, I said to Victoria, Don't you think you're being a bit pathetic? After that night, Victoria was quiet for a long time. I thought that was the end of it, but then I saw Tiffany. In this small town, Yue and I had just left the university area when we saw a figure, wielding a parasol and acting affected, appear before us. When her face was revealed, the smile on my face vanished. She asked, So you have a new girlfriend? She coldly snorted at Yue, saying, Girl, you wouldn't believe how disgusting and ugly he used to be. Before she could finish, Yue slapped her hard. Tiffany tried to retaliate, but I stopped her. Someone called the police. It was a mutual assault, so we ended up signing a settlement agreement. Tiffany, face red and indignant, rolled her eyes at me. I walked up to her, blocking her path with my arm. Are you crazy? I asked. She sneered. Yes, I am. So what? She stepped closer, slightly biting her lip, and looked up at me. I instinctively took a step back. She turned her head away and said, Victoria and Ethan broke up. She still can't get over you. I came to let you know, but you're so ungrateful. I stared at her impassively. She subtly frowned. I took Yue's hand. She was slightly stunned, then returned the grip. I just wanted to leave, not noticing Yue's reddened ears or Tiffany's pale face. Tiffany called out to me again, saying slowly, If you get back together with Victoria, I promise I won't say anything bad about you to her anymore. I replied, Lady, if you're sick, go see a doctor. Months later, I messaged Victoria for the first time, saying, Control your dog. Perhaps due to anger, I had a rare dream about high school. I was in the advanced class, surrounded by high achievers, while I was perpetually at the bottom, a large, dark, and chubby kid. Many spread rumors, cursed, and mocked me. The class monitor said, Look at him, a total delinquent. He probably gets into fights all the time, and will end up at the bottom of society, a waste of taxpayer money. One time I went to the restroom and saw the class monitor being cornered by some bullies who were pulling down his pants and laughing at him. He looked at me for help. I hesitated for a moment, then sighed and went over. In front of everyone, I said, Excuse me, I need to use the restroom. I wasn't a saint, but informing the school security guard was enough. Unexpectedly, the class monitor turned on me, telling the teacher I was the ringleader who had humiliated him. I was speechless. I didn't hate the bullies, but the one I hated was the person I couldn't save. What kind of twisted logic was that? He embellished the story, demanding that I be expelled. The principal was about to give in when Victoria and a security guard appeared in the office. Victoria, articulate and composed, demanded proof and had the security guard recount what happened. She even refuted the principal's attempts to smooth things over. She said, "You all should apologize to Sebastian. If the school dares to suspend Sebastian, we will report this to the higher authorities. Nobody will get away scot-free." She flipped her ponytail, grabbed my hand, and pulled me out. Looking at her bouncing ponytail, the sunlight that day seemed to carry a faint scent of grass. The feeling came on so unexpectedly. I woke up feeling hot and bothered at 2 a.m. I got up, poured a glass of water, and heard a noise outside. I opened the door to see Victoria, looking tired and leaning against the wall. The cold wind ruffled her hair, and her face was pale. She seemed to have lost weight. When she saw me, her unfocused gaze sharpened. The next second, she shut the door. I received a message. "I'm sorry about Tiffany. I had a falling out with her. She won't bother you anymore. And I broke up with Ethan." Victoria settled down temporarily in the nearby city. Every time I went downstairs, she'd be waiting outside. When I came home at night, she'd be there too. I ignored her, and so did my parents. My dad said, "One should have self-respect, but you can't stop a dog from guarding its home." My mom replied, "It's not her house anyway." During this time, my self-media work was finally taking off. I could get small ads now. I and Chenze worked even harder. One day felt like two. I rushed around brainstorming ideas. I was so busy that I didn't see the road and got scraped by a car. Chenze helped me up, asking if I was okay. Yue rushed off like the wind, returning with bags of medicine. Chenze teased her. She was still catching her breath, her bright eyes fixed on me. "Can I?" she asked. "What?" I replied. "Bandage you," she said. I didn't let Yue help and found a nearby chair to treat it myself. The shoot ended early, and Yue insisted on driving me home. I reached for my key. Victoria handed me the car keys. She drove like a turtle, hesitant and constantly looking around as if she'd never driven before. A half-hour drive usually took her an hour and a half. After she dropped me off, she naturally linked her arm through mine, supporting me. But the next second, as she turned, I paused. Victoria was leaning against a wall, her gaze fixed on me. Her face was pale, her lips moving slightly, her steps closing the distance. Tiffany noticed my discomfort. She lowered her head and asked, "Is it someone you dislike?" I replied, "Yeah." I walked past her, ignoring her. Victoria grabbed the edge of my shirt. My lifeless gaze fell on her. She instantly sobered, releasing her grip. She looked down at my foot and asked, "Did you put on medicine?" I remained silent. The door closed in front of her, as it had countless times before, without a word. After I closed the door, the sounds of sizzling food came from the kitchen. My mom, Mrs. Wilson, saw Tiffany and her eyes lit up. "Tiffany, dear, stay for dinner," she said. Tiffany looked hesitantly at me. I nodded. "Don't be shy," I said. "It's rare that Mom is so enthusiastic. You should eat a lot." She smiled happily, a dimple showing on her cheek. I asked her, "Aren't you curious about who she is?" She said, "I guessed, but it's not important." Leaning closer, she whispered, "If you dislike her, she's not important." By 9 o'clock, the moon hung high in the sky after dinner. I walked Tiffany downstairs. As soon as I opened the door, my mother's smile vanished. She said, speechless, "Standing here in the middle of the night is quite frightening." Tiffany's gaze fell on Victoria, and she smiled ambiguously. "Auntie, goodbye," she said. After I saw her out, I told her to call me when she got home. However, she leaned in again, looking pitiful. "Can I get a hug from a regular friend?" she asked. I nodded and gently hugged her. The next second, Tiffany was pulled away by Victoria, who raised her hand. I gritted my teeth. "Victoria!" Victoria froze, her eyes reddening. I couldn't understand her expression. She was the one who wanted to break up. Yet she was acting like this now. Tiffany hid behind me. "Brother, she's so fierce," she said. Victoria, however, persisted, asking, "Who is she, your girlfriend?" I sighed. "Victoria, we've broken up." She said, I know. She became distraught, tears welling up. She mumbled, but I regret regret it. Sebastian. I replied, but I don't regret it. I bluntly refused her. I don't regret breaking up with you, nor do I regret leaving New York, so I will never go back. Whether I have a girlfriend, who she is, or who I marry in the future, it has nothing to do with you, because it won't be you. The sword of Damocles finally fell. The hope in her eyes completely vanished. That night, Victoria didn't wait downstairs. Many nights later, I received a text from Victoria. 2 months had passed since our last meeting. She asked, "Can we meet?" Just to say goodbye. This time I replied, "Yes." Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing everything in white. Unknowingly, the year was coming to an end, an ending and a beginning. I met Victoria at a nearby coffee shop. The ground was covered with a thick layer of snow. The street cleaners had been up early, leaving only tire tracks on the road. The sidewalks hadn't been cleared yet. The top layer of snow had frozen. I kicked a patch of seemingly solid snow. It crumbled easily. I chuckled, but my smile quickly faded. Victoria was standing not far away, her gaze deep and intense. For a moment, I felt like I was back in high school, a snowy winter day. My favorite thing was making snowballs and kicking them away. Victoria opened the window and called out, "Mom said to come up for dinner." "Okay." I laughed, turned and ran back into the house. As I approached her, Victoria sighed in my ear. I thought we were really back in the past. She gave a wry smile. But this time, it's for farewell. We sat at opposite ends of a table. I ordered a coffee and glanced at the time. "I only have an hour," I said. She sat down. "About the diary," she said. "I'm sorry." I replied, "I don't care about that." She said, twisting her fingers, If it weren't for the diary, WWE. I interrupted her. There are no ifs. Even without the diary, we wouldn't have worked out. She pursed her lips. "I've always wondered, after all those years, why didn't you even give me a chance?" I suppressed my irritation. "Then I ask you, why were you with me in the first place?" She didn't speak. I answered for her. "To repay a debt." I summarized this absurd situation. I slowly smiled. "Why do you think your affection for me was some kind of gift? Just because I liked you? Because you thought I was a simp? But actually I got over it not long after you confessed. I rescued you more because of our past connection. I would have done the same for anyone. If you hadn't later given me hope, I would have quickly adjusted and started a new life. I was good to you because of our past connection. Victoria deserved my kindness, so I treated her well. I stirred my coffee, a smile escaping my lips. "Victoria," I said, "love might be wonderful, but it's not so great that it ruins someone's life. Even without you, I'd still live a good life. What bothers me is that you had so many chances to tell me you didn't love me, but you chose the worst way, binding us together. You wasted 7 years of your life, and you wasted mine." Victoria abruptly stood up, her eyes filled with panic. She wanted to explain but didn't know where to begin. She closed her eyes, tears welling up. "No, it's me. You didn't realize your own feelings," I finished, my words confirming what I already knew. She nodded. I laughed harder. "My dad always said, don't let people you dislike anger you. Only care about those who are worth it. That's why I didn't say anything to Tiffany. 1, I didn't care about her opinions. 2, I didn't want you to be unhappy. Liking someone is clear and obvious. I like you, so I want to be good to you." "But what about your feelings?" I asked. Victoria remained silent. I sighed. "If I hadn't found that diary, we would have gotten married. Even then, you would have been unhappy. You'd feel morally obligated, and our marriage would still be unhappy. You still haven't realized that our separation wasn't because of the diary or Tiffany. It was your self-assumed tolerance, which was actually arrogance. You were belittling me. But I'm not entirely blameless," I continued in a softer tone, meeting her anxious gaze. "My mistake was not cutting my losses sooner. When you let your friend treat me that way, I should have known it was over between us. Today is our last meeting. For Auntie's sake, I said, putting on my coat. She quickly stood up. Don't contact me again, Victoria. I didn't look back as I left. As I opened the door, my phone rang. Ethan urged, Are you done? The dinner party's waiting. If you don't come soon, someone's going to come find you. I smirked. Coming. In March, I received a commission from a young boy. In the chilly spring air, he wore a thin school uniform. His left eye was unusual. It seemed blind. In the middle of the street, he stopped us. Big brother, can I make friends here? I want to make friends. The boy's name was Warm. His parents died in a car accident when he was young. His grandmother raised him, often calling him a jinx and neglecting him, viewing his left eye as an omen of bad luck. His classmates bullied him. Nobody likes me, he said. For this commission, we started searching elementary schools, finally finding a girl at Lincoln Elementary. She had a bright smile like a little sun. As we walked her over, she skipped and hopped. Her parents, following behind, said with a helpless chuckle, This child is spoiled. To avoid misunderstanding, she added, But it's not a bad thing. Yeah, nothing is bad. Whether she's lively or quiet, she's still herself, I said. The two children met. Within 15 minutes, they were best friends. The girl looked down and said seriously, Your eye isn't ugly at all. They just don't have good taste. From today on, I'm your friend. I said, Me too. Ethan added, Me too. The girl's mother knelt down and touched the boy's head. My house isn't far from here. If you miss Mandy, come over. Auntie will make you something delicious. Before leaving, I told the boy, Don't pay too much attention to what people who dislike you say. Those things aren't important. What matters is that you know who you are. The boy looked puzzled. Smiling, I patted his shoulder. Warm. You're a great kid. I didn't immediately release this story. I told Ethan I still had a bonus scene to record. While editing videos at home that night, Vivian called. Sebastian, come down. We haven't seen each other in almost a week. She'd started a new job and had business trips abroad. When I went downstairs, she was dragging a large suitcase up the stairs. Seeing me, she waved. I quickly took it from her. She smiled. These are your favorite snacks from high school. A gift from one friend to another. I laughed wryly. After losing weight, I hadn't touched these snacks. It was strangely nostalgic. Our relationship never progressed further. One day I asked Vivian, Did you know me before? She leaned closer. I didn't understand those things back then. I just really wanted to be friends with you. But you transferred schools shortly after, and I was heartbroken. Vivian was once small, timid, and always walked with her head down. Sebastian was always defiant, head held high, ready to fight back against unwarranted malice. The teenage Vivian thought, I really want to be friends with Sebastian. But for years, she never dared to speak to him. When she learned of his transfer, she cried at home. She never told Sebastian. At 23, she and Sebastian had a brief encounter due to work. Victoria and Sebastian hadn't seen each other for years until a chance encounter. She recognized him, but he didn't recognize her. Later, Tiffany returned to her hometown and learned that Sebastian was back. She immediately reached out. She desperately wanted to be friends with him. After spending time with Sebastian, the fog lifted, and she saw a truer version of him. Her feelings for him had grown slowly over the years, a seed planted in middle school that finally blossomed. Sebastian was shocked to hear this, saying, I never imagined someone felt that way about me back then. Tiffany propped her chin up, looking at him, and said, You shine brightly. Like-minded people are always drawn to you. It's fate that we've met again. After parting ways with Sebastian at the coffee shop, Victoria never contacted him again. Years of affection had crumbled, and the thought of it brought a sharp pain to her heart. Yet, she was also to blame. After Tiffany created a scene at Sebastian's, they had a huge fight. Victoria didn't understand why Tiffany constantly humiliated Sebastian until Tiffany repeated, Then get Sebastian back. What's so good about lynching? Why does he stay there? In Tiffany's twisted words, Victoria sensed something different. She asked, "Do you like Sebastian?" Tiffany rolled her eyes, her usual response, and said, "Why would I like that deadbeat?" Victoria pressed, "You do like him." Tiffany, giving up the pretense, retorted, "So what? That's why he always looks at me like I'm trash. If he'd been even a little kinder, I wouldn't have treated him that way." Victoria was shocked and filled with regret. She had a friend who constantly pined after her boyfriend. Victoria bit her lip and said, "But he despises you." Tiffany countered, "Doesn't he despise you too?" Victoria replied, "I'm different. I have feelings for him." Tiffany said, "But to Sebastian it's all the same." Ignoring Tiffany's words, Victoria went to Sebastian's hometown, waiting pathologically outside his apartment building. She wanted to tell him that she loved him, that she'd broken up with Ethan, and that she never loved him. She wanted them to start over, but Sebastian didn't give her the chance. Tiffany's words proved true. Sebastian despised her too. After Sebastian left, Victoria sat in the cafe for a long time. When she finally left, she felt lost and directionless. She and Sebastian had no home. No direction could lead her to a home with him. She deceived herself, forcing herself to ignore him, working excessively until exhaustion landed her in the hospital. In her hospital room, she opened Sebastian's social media account. He'd posted new videos, one with a special message, "To the brave boy, hello. What are you doing now? Are you buried in textbooks or navigating the hustle and bustle of the city? Are you a student or a father? Are you doing well? Are you happy? No matter your role, I want to tell you today, you're amazing. I used to be a weightlifter with a strong physique but an appearance that many didn't find attractive. I've heard people talk about me, belittle me, but it didn't break me. As a teenager, I always tried to stand tall. I thought, what do they know? I could gain weight for training, practicing day after day. Of course, I'm proud of that version of myself. Similarly, I hope you're proud of yourself. After college, I joined a big company, working in marketing for a few years. When I quit, I struggled for a while, but I chose to leave. I came back home and decided to just relax. I was lucky. It was at this time that I realized life's margin for error is much greater than I thought. When you realize you're on the wrong path, just turn around. It's better to change course than to keep going down a dead end. Of course, not turning back is okay too. The next moment might bring unexpected joy. Brave boy, I hope you're proud of yourself. I hope you love yourself, just like I do. I'm very happy with who I am. Victoria watched the video repeatedly, a form of self-torture, the pain growing sharper. She remembered the boy's cold gaze that day. That night she had a dream. It was snowing, and the boy was making snowballs. She ran to him and threw herself into his arms. "Sebastian," she choked out. The boy looked down, his eyes bright and warm. Victoria said goodbye. In the dream, Victoria said goodbye to Sebastian one last time. The dream was the most beautiful moment of life, but reality was a stark contrast, years of what-ifs. She had realized too late that she had squandered her youth and Sebastian's.